Welcome back to the show with no name. Today I'm going to call it the Send It to Zero show, where we talk about all the stuff that's super cool happening in Bitcoin that is inevitably going to kill Bitcoin, according to people much smarter than us. So that's what we're going to talk about, all of the cool stuff on Bitcoin. I'm here with my partners in crime, Charlie, Bob, Danny. How are you guys?
Doing great.
Yeah, good. Great, thank you. How are you?
Love it, love it. I love how it's always hard to podcast, like you say what's up to people, and it's like Charlie knows, like, just say what's up with things, so it's not like crazy mic over everyone's talking at the same time. So yeah,
I'm ready for the metaverse when we don't end up talking over each other. We can read each other's body language a little bit better. A lot of people say, "Oh, the metaverse is overblown," but man, being able to communicate like the same kind of implicit, all the holistic communication in the future of this digital age will revolutionize online communication.
Like the Zuckerberg headset. That's the thing you're talking about, right? The one where you can basically smell someone.
Which apparently is still competitive because he put out that kind of knee-jerk video the other day.
I didn't see that.
I'm bullish.
Is he like, I'm still relevant? Like because of the Apple thing, right?
Yeah.
Yep.
He put out a video
by the way,
he was like, so the Quest is actually really good, and the Apple, Vision is good too, but it lacks some things. And then Zuckerberg actually came across pretty well, but you could tell he was trying to make sure that people didn't forget about the Quest.
Yep. He was also wearing his a plain black shirt, looking simple, not like a multi-billionaire. He's accessible.
That's what a billionaire looks like.
He's just one of you guys. Yeah,
that's what you look like. If you're wearing Gucci print stuff head to toe, you're not a billionaire. That means that you're less than a billionaire and you're trying to look like a billionaire. But if you're a billionaire, that's what you look like. Is the Zuck, I forget what this thing's called, the Quest, is that what it's called?
The Quest.
Is the competitive advantage that has on pretty much everything else that's ever occurred is onboard processing instead of streaming the data, right? Like that's the point of it.
We could talk about this for forever. I think one of the competitive advantages for Quest is that it's kind of embracing more of an open development as opposed to Vision Pro's Apple's closed development process. I do think that's a compelling angle, is in that if you look at the adoption of hardware throughout history, open usually wins out, but not always.
Yeah, and price point. Like as Zuck said, it's 7 times cheaper than the Apple Vision Pro, so you get that factor as well. But it looks like you're putting a plastic canister over your face, versus like the Pro actually looks halfway decent, like ski goggles. So
either way, you look like an idiot on a subway doing that. But I don't think one of them is meant to be worn on the subway, and the other one clearly is. I look for it. This is going to be fun to look back in 30 years and remember the first cell phone? We all joke about it. It's like a military backpack. Like this fits a two-hander, and only 30 or 40 years, 30 years later, I guess, we have these phones that are like microscopic and devices that can do the same thing at a fraction of the size. The headset's going to be this big in 20 years, but that thing is super funny right now.
100%. Okay, let's, metaverse is super far in the future, so let's come back to things happening right now. Lots of Bitcoin things. I'm down to start with the more degen thing first, which is either runes or it's either Merlin chain. I'm pretty open to address both. I saw you deep diving into Merlin a little bit, Charlie. I did yesterday. There is so much TVL locked in that protocol. I'm shocked.
Dude, it's huge. It's massive.
So, what have you seen? This is crazy to me.
So, 2 weeks ago, you could tell that the people who were on the very edge of the degen, dialed in degens, they were starting to switch to talking about Merlin chain, put the crystal balls in their Twitter profile and researching it. But I don't know what they could have researched because there was virtually no documentation. It was exclusively marketing, and I could not for the life of me figure out what the hell this was. I finally got a paper sent to me, which was 10 pages and 90% marketing, but had 3 lines which explained, it's a Polygon CDK, and it uses multi-party computation to secure the assets. So I have figured out what it was at a high level, and so it's just basically running all the stuff on Polygon. and it's pretty much a glorified multi-sig right now. I think that's what it's going to be, but it opens up a broader conversation of, does it really matter? Because that's kind of what all the L2s on these other chains are anyway. They're kind of all just glorified multi-sigs. If you want to be a reductionist, I know there's a wide range of trust assumptions across the board, but I think branding and marketing is incredibly important because if you can get users to bridge their assets over, you can drive forward activity. And so how much is it? Is it like several $100 million?
If I'm reading this number correctly, it's over $1 billion now. If I read that correctly. Yeah, it's like 1.1 billion. But this is where like I can't tell. It looks like people are staking a bunch of stuff. So it's like BRC20s, it's Bitcoin, and I think it's bitmaps. And if it's bitmaps,
a lot of bitmaps bridged over.
I bet you there's a ton of volume code for that, which is like there's 800,000 bitmaps that are in existence, which people minted for next to nothing because they just subscribed them. And then they've been sitting pretty much dormant, selling for 200 to 400, and no one's selling because they all believe in the metaverse, whatever. So like that number is way inflated because there's not buy pressure on that thing or people actually selling it. So like it looks huge because 100 people are buying bitmaps on a given day or something, but there's 800,000 available.
Yeah. So it's
if you hover over the number, it gives you a breakdown. $40 million in bitmaps, 217 million in BRC 420, 227 million in BRC 20, 685 million in BTC.
685 million in BTC.
That's what they claim. Impossible to verify.
Yeah. I don't believe there's an explorer for this, is there, Bob? I have not seen one. There's a...
I just did a little bit of digging. There's like no information whatsoever. So the takeaways here are we have some magic thing that's happening. Merlin, magic. And all the degens want to do is lock up their assets and earn token. And you throw them token and they will do anything and they will risk all kinds of stuff. I mean, this is what we saw with Blast as well. Blast came out and said, hey, it's going to be awesome. Come, one way deposit your assets and it'll be awesome and you'll earn all these things. And hopefully in the future, we'll let you get your assets bridged back out again, maybe. And that's what's happening here. It's the Blast model, which is, this is the degen casino of crypto.
Yeah, if you think about it, it's pretty brilliant marketing because you have a bunch of, like I would say, idle capital in ordinals. Now we can debate the true TVL representation of that, but you consider the fact that Bitmaps has generated considerable wealth on paper, and these people want to do something with it, and they are the type of user who will do something with it. Give them a button to click and bridge their assets over, and a big shiny number on a front end, and they will do it. So, look, as we all know, because if this ain't your first rodeo or cycle, this works at the beginning of a cycle, and I personally think that the risk assumptions are quite low compared as they might be towards the back end of one of these. But this is one of those things where I heard the music spinning up, and now we're all going to start walking around the chairs. And somebody will start pulling them out one by one. But I think we have the music just got started.
I mean, you said risk profile is pretty low, but honestly, we don't know anything. We don't know how the funds are custody. We don't know who holds the funds. We don't know who holds the assets. It could be a centralized team that just decides to run away with all the funds tomorrow, and we wouldn't know.
Yeah, I say trust assumptions in that there's only a couple people you have to trust.
A Nakamoto coefficient of
that always works out.
1.
That's never a problem.
Yeah, interesting. Okay, well the fact it's done on Polygon is interesting. It opens up a question for me of like the term L2 is getting muddied very quickly, and it's driving some people absolutely bonkers because they want to be like purist about trustlessness and all this thing. And BitVM's making that also messy, where it's like once you have one of n minority trust assumptions, like you can peg into most sidechains relatively trustless. So any L2 sidechain becomes a Bitcoin, sidechain.
Did you just say relatively trustless?
Yes.
Trustless-ish.
It makes sense to go from Merlin to relatively trustless. Like these are on the same spectrum.
Optimistic approach to trust assumptions.
This is like mostly trustless.
Yeah. I'm fast and loose with my words. But yeah, like BitVM, if it works as they say, I think it makes pretty much L2 could be a Bitcoin L2 as far as like being able to bridge your Bitcoin in and get it back relatively trustless. And so you learn nothing on this podcast, people. Sorry. But so like that's the question is like if you could peg into actual Polygon, which is very robust and like working, versus someone spitting up the open source code to make it Bitcoin focused, like this L2 thing becomes really freaking wonky to me. Like there's a narrative angle there. There's who's building apps in numbers. So like Merlin, Chain of Pi have more apps on the Polygon stack than Polygon will. So maybe go to Merlin. But yeah, this question of like what an L2 is now it's like I don't even know what to make of it anymore, and like where to put my Bitcoin.
We need more words to describe the kind of range of Bitcoin abstractions. We probably need a narrower term for L2 because it's becoming meaningless. And I think we need to say this references Bitcoin. This uses Bitcoin's data publishing layer. This is a strict layer 2. This is a loose layer 2 abstraction. Sidechains. So, ETH has actually been pretty decent at some of this, where they've kind of defined different categories of like references to ETH. And I think we just copy paste a lot of those terminology.
Yeah, so the quick gist is everything claims to be a layer 2 on Bitcoin and nothing is. Literally nothing. Zero. There are no layer 2s on Bitcoin right now. Zero, because Bitcoin can't do it. Bitcoin itself cannot verify validity proofs. You cannot have a true L2 on Bitcoin right now. So that's the one sentence. People try to change definitions, but if you look at like L2 Beat on Ethereum, L2 Beat did probably the best job on Ethereum of categorizing here's what an L2 is and here's what it is not. Polygon is not an L2 on Ethereum. Polygon is a side chain on Ethereum because it's a separate blockchain, separate consensus, additional trust assumptions. I know a group doing an L2 Beat for Bitcoin, and I'm hopeful that this will kind of clear up the muddied water on terminology because we can finally look and say, here's what you're doing. Here are your trust assumptions. That is clearly a side chain. We're not going to call that a layer 2. You can call it a layer 2, but it's not. Like I'm hopeful. So I think it's releasing at ETH Denver. So here in a couple of weeks. And I'm hopeful that we can start some meaningful conversations around terminology that the community can start backing and can call people out when they, Merlin says, Merlin seal, biggest fair launch of layer 2. And it's like people are going to use it for their marketing advantage. So
you know how and you go...
Yeah, shout out L2 Beat. Probably one of the most important information streams to follow right this time and going forward. Yeah.
I was going to say, when you go to a savings account, like a bank, and you put $5,000 in a savings account, and then the bank is like, we can probably make 8% on that, so we'll give you back 1 or 2%. And you're trusting them to do that, and it's a regulated authority, and it's federally insured, and yada, yada, yada. This is basically what is going on with Merlin, right? Like you're just like, I'm going to give these people this thing, assume they can make some money off of it and give me back a certain amount of it, except that it's totally unregulated and nobody's accountable for anything. So we're taking this thing that is decentralized in the way that we like it to be, and then just giving it back to a bank essentially, except with none of the insurance. It's terrifying to me. It's a terrifying way to do things.
You should be terrified. I am glad that someone is terrified.
Feels good to hear you say that, Bob.
But if you want a 10x or 100x, you have to, jump in the wild, wild west.
Or a negative 10 or a negative 100.
Dude, yeah. I don't know. It's making my job trying to find like where's the alpha at for like teams and stuff so damn hard. Just because like everyone's doing ecosystem plays right now, trying to do L2s, and like I'm not too risky at the protocol level, so I'm looking for like the application stack level. But everything is up in the air right now. Like I still think Rootstock could pop. Now that EVMs are becoming more normal.
I love
So,
this
maybe-
Rootstock take, Jake. Could you go into this a bit? Because I saw you say some stuff about this, and it got me thinking again. Luxor, we do Rootstock, we participate in Rootstock consensus. So like, go off and kind of.
I'll give a little spiel because like everyone's heard of Rootstock. Merge Mine Chain has half the hash rate. Besides Foundry, they have pretty much all the larger miners. Everyone from Antpool to Luxor, and then once you get past Luxor, it gets in like the long tail pretty quickly. So like, they got good coverage there. So that's pretty secure. Although there is some risk factor, just to like full disclosure. Given Antpool's current hash rate, they could 51% attack Rootstock currently. So there's that. But they've been doing it for a while. That's like biting the hand that feeds. There's some game theory there that's supposed to work. But Rootstock is nice because one, they have currently the biggest DeFi platform on Bitcoin, which is Sovereign in TVL. And all the L2s are doing these like EVM stacks, Polygon, they're basically just moving ZK rollup stuff and EVM stuff into a Bitcoin sidechain with some kind of mechanism to peg in. If that works, Rootstock has a ton of stuff already built infrastructure-wise to be a first mover. And the thing no one's talking about is consensus. Like, how is consensus reached? And until Bitcoin L1 does rollup, like verifying, there's some weird thing in the middle with centralization, or you do stacks mining. So Rootstock, I think, has the best claim to pretty safe consensus if you're using that. So I would love to see Rootstock be a first mover for people who want to build on EVM on Bitcoin. And then as things progress, you can always technically start on Rootstock, build your DeFi platform there. If Rootstock pops, like, you're good to go. You made the right call. But if Merlin does pop, like, it's both on Polygon, which is built on Solidity. So it's like you could just bridge over there quickly and kind of like build two applications. So I think if you're not going to go like L1 Bitcoin script, there's a pretty good dev angle here to build on Rootstock and then watch the landscape very closely and be a fast first mover. That's my
I think it makes sense. Right model, wrong timing.
Right.
And then I kind of wonder, so like everybody and their dog is doing EVM on Bitcoin. It's already a month into the frenzy, too much to keep track of. Do you think this is a winner take all? Do you think this is a winner take most? Do you think this is diverse? Do you think anybody wins? I'm not really sure how this plays out.
What's interesting is I've been trying to think about, and this is like work related, but I've been trying to think about what does network effects look like in Web3? And for the most part, I don't think Web3 has very good network effects. Like, it has really good viral loops. Like, you do an airdrop that builds FOMO. One centralized issuer becomes 1,000, which becomes people FOMOing in. It becomes 10,000. But the network effect definition is that each additional user adds value to the previous users. And airdrops don't do that. So most Web3 mechanics aren't actually network effects, which means they don't have staying power. The only network effect I could see besides like Magic Eden's like two-sided marketplace is actually the ecosystem. Like, ETH is expensive. Like, there's so many better ways to use Ethereum as an asset, but ETH still has all the liquidity, like by a huge market share. So there's something there about like once you get enough applications and liquidity there, it has its own network effect that you don't want to go to the L2, even though it's better. So I think there's something there of like where the ecosystems go, it's hard to say, But once one pops, there's a pretty good chance that one becomes the dominant one, with like 2 or 3 like ones that have some market share, and then the long tail drops off fast, whether that's Rootstock or Stacks or Liquid or whatever. But it is interesting because outside of the big 3, which I call Liquid, Rootstock, and Stacks, like they each have their own language: Clarity, Solidity, and Simplicity / Bitcoin Script. On the EVM side, like I don't know where that's gonna go. Like that's an open question for me. So I don't know. I guess there's like a tension there of like Stacks is in the news right now. Everyone's all hyped on Stacks, and it has its own language. But that doesn't mean that EVM is necessarily be huge because of all of its infrastructure plays. So I don't know.
Yeah, EVM and SVM is gaining popularity. I mean, a lot of people have kind of hung their hats on the EVM narrative, and I don't see that as a guaranteed deal. I think there's a lot of ways of performing computation on or off chain. And I think that's all back on the menu, especially as a lot of this now starts to reference Bitcoin. If you have a robust virtual machine of some kind or some way to perform compute, it makes sense that it's a little bit more blue ocean turning back to Bitcoin. Because all you need to do is publish or compute that to Bitcoin some way. I see Bob nodding his head. Bob, you probably have some insights. I mean, you're the Internet Computer guy, ICP, so like you may have some thoughts there too.
Yeah, I mean, I see lots of network effects on the Ethereum side because of the developer infrastructure required. I think when you have a new ecosystem with a new language, with a new compute environment, you have this hurdle that you have to overcome, which is essentially build all the tools you need for DeFi and for NFTs and for lending and for DAOs. And that's non-trivial. If we look at examples, most L1s with a new computing environment struggle for this exact reason. And the only chain that perhaps has been able to overcome this is Solana. And that's because of massive capital injection that resulted in token spike, which results in more attention, which results in more devs, which results in more funds to pay people. And so you have this huge, surge essentially. And so I think Solana was able to recover so well from the drop that they had post FTX because they already got over this initial infrastructure hurdle and they already had all the pieces in place. It was easy for devs to go in and get started. They had the rails that the payment rails and other things. And so I think Solana has made it over that. But if you look at other L1s, I mean, where else have we seen massive development activity like that? We haven't, and it's because you haven't made it over this L1 infrastructure hurdle, I think. And so to me, that is one of the reasons why there are network effects on Ethereum, is because you're already over that infrastructure hurdle. You could argue that another one is liquidity, getting liquidity. And once you have liquidity, it's much easier to get more liquidity. I think that's the second network effect, where there's just so much liquidity on Ethereum. So like if you look at the approach that Build on Bitcoin, BOB, is taking, it's an optimistic roll up on Ethereum intentionally with awesome Bitcoin tech, because they want to tap into the native liquidity on Ethereum. That's kind of their play, is they want to be an optimistic L2 on Ethereum with Bitcoin ties, specifically to try to get liquidity from Ethereum, which I think is a pretty smart play.
It's a pretty smart play.
I'm super bearish on that. I've seen that it sounds good. I've tried to figure out, because like, there's some people in Stacks like Alex that have done the ETH to Stacks bridge to try and do that exact thing. No one uses it. And when you look on like the wrap BTC on Ethereum, none of it's in DeFi protocols. It's all just sitting in the asset for price exposure. So I don't think getting from ETH to Bitcoin's that hard, especially if you just want to like sell and move over. So I don't think people are going to move in mass through bridges from ETH, even if it's easy. If they want to be here, they want to be. They'll find a way to get over here for the most part. Like there's lots of exchange infrastructure. I do think the EVM thing you said is all like 100% correct. Like I think one thing that's not gonna work is anybody trying to launch an L2 with no token that's not EVM. Like there's zero chance that works because the bootstrapping effects of like trying to survive that bootstrapping phase with no token and build infrastructure and educate devs is like such a heavy lift.
Challenging. Yeah.
Which is what that's what a token gives you. Like it gives you initial funding to focus devs on these problems that you want to solve that are already solved on EVM. So
my only counter is bridging ETH to stacks is worse than bridging ETH to an optimistic rollup. You get trustless bridging in the case of bridging from ETH to an optimistic rollup, whereas you have trusted bridging going from ETH to stacks. So I would say, I mean, there's already lots of TVL on ETH L2s. And so I would argue that
is there though? Because like I think when I searched it, it was like 70% of the market share is still on the L1, even though it's much cheaper to transact on the L2.
Yeah, I would say what, 10 billion? What is what's locked on L2s right now? Oh, it's up to 23 billion. 23 billion TVL across
on ETH L2s.
Yeah.
Okay.
So I mean that's significant. So I think that bridging is easier to stomach than bridging to something like stacks. So I think there's more hope for being able to capture some of that liquidity on the BOB side, for example.
Yep.
It's just a really good time to have a token on something that references Bitcoin right now. And I'm not even.
I'm gonna launch one tomorrow. It's coming, guys.
I'm just not. I never like being the guy to say that, and I'm always I always want to be critical of anything being tokenized, but it's very clear the meta going forwards is to get token exposure to these things.
We should do a theoretical exercise where we launch our own L2, hypothetically right now, and we each get to pick.
Move outside the United States first.
Okay, you can live anywhere you want. You can live anywhere you want.
Yeah, Donny.
You all get to pick one thing, the thing you care most about for this L2.
We can build our own L2, like Build-A-Bear.
Yep.
It's like build our L2.
Yeah, it's Build-A-Bear. Token or no token? I'm thinking token.
I think we go token. I think this is brilliant. Like, there's so many launch pads for like ordinal collections. We need a launch pad for L2s just to bring the barrier down. It's too hard to launch an L2.
Well, that's supposedly what BVM Network is, which is a modular build-it-yourself L2 that I can't figure out what it actually is. But that's the branding for it.
I think it's an optimistic rollup on an optimistic rollup on Ethereum that has some potential ties to Bitcoin eventually.
Is it called optimistic rollup?
If you're kidding or not.
No, I'm serious. I'm dead serious.
It's called optimistic rollup because you have to just believe that it's going to work out.
You have to be so optimistic. The cup isn't just half full. It's overflowing and shooting out the top. That's how optimistic you are.
Yep. I'm going to the moon. Okay, let's transition into. I want to talk about runes and like hard coding. I think we got some early alpha or like some clarity on some rune stuff. Again, I haven't followed super closely. If you guys have anything to discuss, I'd love drop it on us.
Yeah, I don't have. I only finally recently got interested in runes. I enjoyed Casey's post on it. I enjoyed the flurry of activity after it, and I kind of checked out personally on what are runes even. Because it's pretty clear that a bunch of these other people are going to launch their other runes standards adjacent or similar to it, but everyone is waiting with expectant breath for block 8 of 40K. Casey's finally kind of settled on an actual standard. No documentation, but the most documentation is really the Hell Money podcast and interpreting the implementation. So I finally kind of got interested again. And yeah, what do you think, Donny?
I think it's exciting that everyone's excited about something and that everyone is just trying to like make claims, and everyone's trying to put a flag on the moon that no one can get to at the moment. So like it's going to be fun to see how they end up getting those flags down. And I like that Casey was just like, you can't. I did. They made 10 that are just hard coded in. No one can get there first really and like claim their thing, you know. So like it's been made fair. The game is fair enough anyway, I think at this point. And you can buy your way into being the 11th, but you can't buy your way into being the 1 through 10th, which is cool. I really dig that you have to destroy the UTXO to spend it, and you don't just end up with a wallet littered, or actually tons of wallets. Actually, Bob, I think you a long time ago, like 6 months ago or something, posted a tweet that showed UTXO numbers, like raw numbers from 2014 through 2023, and there was a sharp uptick, clearly from like us and from like inscriptions and mostly BRC20s. Which the question I have is, what does that even do to the network? Like, does it actually do anything, or is it just annoying for all the people who have all these like hundreds of thousands of sats just sitting around in transfer inscriptions that are useless at this point? Like, is that actually bad for the network? Is it heavy? Is it?
It makes the storage requirements for nodes slightly higher, because you have to store all UTXOs currently that are spendable have to be tracked. And so like you can kind of think of it like from the beginning of time, it's tracking, like it's creating and destroying unspent outputs, and that balloons and slowly gets bigger as there's more outputs. It's always keeping that in storage. There was some debate amongst some of the maxis of like, is that kept in RAM? Meaning like once we get above 32 gigabytes, this becomes Raspberry Pis across the world are going to crash. It's Y2K all over again. And that's not the case. So it's flushed to storage periodically and then brought back in when it's spent. But yeah, if that number gets too big, like you have storage, as Charlie said, you have archival nodes that are like storing everything, and there's like the data, and then there's the UTXO set, and they can both grow together. So if like everything is just stamps, for example, technically the UTXO set could grow to like another 60 gigs per year. So like the two numbers I think you have to play with there is like 4 megabyte blocks could get you to 210 gigs per year, and then the UTXO set could go to 60 gigs per year. So that's 260 max growth per year, which means you got to buy another terabyte hard drive every 4 years. Like that's the limit as far as I know.
The maxi argument that inscriptions are going to bloat the nodes is really, really dumb. The argument or concern that the UTXO set ballooning could harm like hardware performance and make it harder to run node, that's a valid criticism. It could also have some good effects. It could drive more dynamism across how people run nodes, which is interesting. But yeah, I think it is a good valid criticism, and it's generally assumed to not be a super healthy thing for the UTXO set to really bloat. That's kind of the general idea.
So even if it didn't have any benefit whatsoever for the network at large, though, it still has benefits for anybody who wants to partake in shitcoining, because they now get to not have hundreds of thousands of sats just littering their wallet, probably on the Taproot side where they're never going to go and they're never going to really know how to spend them unless they get out into Sparrow and they like figure out some actual UTXO management, which again, may be good that BRCs did that, because it'll motivate people to get into Sparrow and actually learn how to use the Bitcoin network just a bit more. So I'm glad that we had BRCs. And I'm glad that ruins are on the way in order to solve this potential issue for not just the network, for like people who just want to mess around. Something else that I think is exciting about it is that it's compatible with Lightning. To go back to the not an L2 discussion, because it could completely remove a lot of this trading from the main net, which is, I don't know if that's a good thing or a bad thing, or it's negligible, but because like then we don't get mining income from that quite as regularly. But is that what we are? Is that what we want to lean on?
Well, theoretically, it's compatible with anything that's UTXO based. So any kind of abstraction, which is really cool. That's kind of the dream and the idea. If you want to try to set up a fungible token standard on Bitcoin, designing it like runes actually is pretty brilliant. And I'm kind of surprised that for all of the talking and discussion about which runes are going to be hot, I log on to Twitter and I see people like in these spaces for hours and hours a day. and they're all discussing their opinions on which runes are hot, their opinions on KC hard coding it into the Ord client or not. And I don't, and most of these people have made very little attempt to actually understand how runes even work, which kind of blows my mind. And I guess I should be expecting this, but some of the people with the most strong opinions about runes are the ones with the least understanding about them, which brings us to the hard-coded 10 of the first 10, which I personally, depending on how I wake up, I either love it or am neutral about it. I don't hate it. I think it makes total sense to take the first one. But then I also want to tell the people, you can just remove, I think it may be as simple as just removing the flag or the lines in the Ord client, which say these 10 runes are hard-coded. You can just run a fork of that and not abide by it. But the whole point of all this is social consensus around being Casey's standards. So then that brings all with it the whole kind of Casey package of it's Casey's wild idea, and he's going to implement it how he wants. And so,
and because it's social consensus driven, if Casey takes the first 10, then we're probably going to have 5 or 10 tokens that are trying to be the first true, fairly acquired runes on Bitcoin, because if they were pre-programmed in, there's always a way to define it to get social consensus in a way that makes sense. And so inevitably there will always be projects claiming certain firsts, and depending on the virality of the idea, or how much it makes sense to someone, depends on probably how much traction they get. But
yeah, I think in runes 11th is first, not first is first.
I think that's why he did 10, because if he did 1, they'd be like, yeah, but that one doesn't count. And then he was just like, what if we do 2? Well, and then everybody's going to go, that one doesn't count. But if you do 10, you've done a whole 0 set extra. And then you'll the 11th. What is the 11th?
He said specifically that he wanted to take away the single digits because it's runes 0 through 9. So the 11th one is actually number 10. I get that. That makes sense to me. That's why it's 10. A lot of people are speculating, is he designing this? Does he have his own plans? I don't think people realize just how open Casey is, that he has really no idea, that he's workshopping this out in the open, and that this is not some grand design, but rather more of a fun game to him. And everyone assumes a lot more design than there is. The design happened on the plane flight back from Singapore, where he sketched it out to Aaron and talks about that. Beyond that, it's kind of just workshopping it as he discusses it live on.
Do you think this is how religion forms? What do you think happened 2,000 or 3,000 years ago? How did every? Do you think some guy was just
a science fiction book and
what if you do this one? Yeah, okay,
that's how you. Yeah,
it's already happened a few times. Well, I think this is another one. I think everyone's we can't quite get in touch with Casey and ask him the questions, so we're just gonna make shit up.
Yeah, Casey builds verticals like he does his freestyle dancing. It's just off the cuff. He's going with the flow, man.
Yeah, but there's secret messages in those dances, so watch very carefully. Okay?
Look what he's pointing at on the wall at minute 17. Yeah, totally. Quick question on the hard coding. So he's hard coded the first 10, which is 0 through 9. How are new ones? How do people claim new ones? Is it one per block, or some kind of what does that process look like?
Oh, it's just a deploy transaction. It's limited to 13 characters first.
Yeah.
So it has to be 13 characters, and then every certain amount of time it drops a character.
Every 4 months or so, he kind of divided so the character reduces by 1 count each 4 months or so. It maps onto the halving pretty well. It's actually pretty cool. I think this is probably the least understood part of runes, is that Casey is very much a numerologist, a number file, if you will. And that's, in my opinion, the coolest part of that's actually why I'm most excited about runes, is because he's thought a lot about the how to issue them in a way that's creative, delays gratification for people. Because if you want this standard to be more than a flash in the pan 2-month hot thing, you need to think kind of 4 years in advance, and that's impossible to do in crypto. That is that's generational time. in our world. So you can only set the rule set so presciently, and I think it makes sense. I don't know how to design a shitcoin token standard, but this seems fine to me.
Quick note on the UTXO set. We've had about 80 million UTXOs all time, from the beginning of time until when Ordinal started, and since that time we have now had 80 million more in the last year. So that's the current state of growth, and you can see a little blip when the Sophon was deployed, because UTXOs went up and then UTXOs started coming back down, and then they started going back up again once it was no longer there. So yeah, pretty interesting.
That's my favorite inside joke in Bitcoin in 2023 is the bot that was chewing up or front running all of the PRC launches.
Yep.
In 10 years, I'm going to be like, I was there for that. I watched that happen. In fact, I took advantage of it because it took some pressure off the network, like a noticeably huge amount.
Yes, it did.
Yeah, I think it's also funny. I think that bot that Rendell did caused Atomicals to add their like micro proof of work thing. So like when you submit a transaction, you compare it as like a little bit of proof of work. So that if the Sophon was going to front run Atomicals transactions, it would show up as invalid because there wasn't proof of work there. So it's like that little micro thing, from my understanding, was like a countermeasure to beat the Sophon for the Atomicals protocol, which is pretty clever.
I mean, yeah, you could beat the Sophon, but then there's more Sophons deployed, and there's more. If it comes down to transaction ordering, this happens at the block producer level, and that's where all the fun is. We haven't seen it happen at scale yet. I think that once that Pandora's box is open, we could see some real shenanigans happen. And I don't think we've even begun to see the shenanigans. Well, we've begun to see a little bit of them, but it's going to get more shenanigan-y.
Yeah, that's actually probably a good segue because we're coming up on an hour. So let's do like one more topic. And everyone's talking about the halving, and there's going to be, is it first epic sat mined? So there's a lot of people talking about. Okay, fourth epic sat. People are talking a lot about miners are going to be aggressively fighting for that first post halving block, and it's going to be like deep reorgs and like it's going to be there's a lot of value in that block potentially. I don't know. I'm curious, like your guys' thoughts on this kind of thing.
I have some opinions. I was trying to be kind of first out the gate with some of these, but as far as I see it, the landscape of block producers do not really have on their radar the epic sat. Yes, a considerable amount of the hash rate is pulling uncommons, but it's a relatively unsophisticated understanding of what's going on. I don't think that's going to be a motivation. What is going to be motivation is if we see a massive fee spike in those first blocks for the first 8-block 840K or the ones right after it, that will create incentive for reorgs because the pools have logic in their block construction and in their mining strategy to optimize to capture these fee spikes, especially when they're easily telegraphed. We saw this with the DGods block. In fact, that was one of the deepest reorgs, 3-block reorg that we've seen in a long time. And I specifically point to that because I think that is the case study we look at. And I also think it should kind of terrify us a little bit that it's possible, because if we look at the fact that I believe Coinbase and other major institutional custody models have 6 blocks as safe for consumers, then 3, or if we see 4-block reorgs, that gets like scary close to like demonstrating empirically that like there's incentive to reorg these. And it so this should be a discussion point, I think, for a lot of people, especially as we head into the halving.
Pretty sure Coinbase reduced their number of confirms to like 2.
We've seen a 3-block reorg, then, Coinbase, maybe I'm sure Coinbase has other safeguards and measures in place, but like,
Yes.
I mean, I don't know if everybody does. I think a lot of wallets or like hot wallets haven't. And I'm not super familiar with the logic in there, but like they could be at risk. Some of the smaller custodians too.
Yep. What's the thinking for why there's going to be a massive spike in those first few blocks? Like, what's the behavior that's going to happen? Do we know?
Runes, baby. So imagine this. I mean, even if people aren't trying to just deploy their first rune token, like if Casey's already hard-coded 10 degen runes, there's going to...
You want to mint it.
Yeah, he says, quote, I'm going to be there degenning these at the same time you are. I can imagine a scenario, whether it's Casey or some other thing, because 2 months is a long time. People will be wanting to mint these. Imagine RSIC continues being hot. They deploy it, announce this is the token immediately. That block, next block become the absolute wildest blocks for people to try to etch out the rune fully. So,
well,
yeah.
And if you're thinking about BRC20, Ordi, for those that got in early and held, did like a 25,000x. And so when you have that kind of precedent set for new tokens on Bitcoin, people will think, oh, well, if Ordi has $1 billion market cap, then that means the first rune token or the first 10 rune tokens have the potential to have $1 billion market cap. So why wouldn't I spend, thousands and thousands of dollars in fees to acquire early tokens?
It's like, traffic is going to be bad for the whole month leading up to Christmas, or like because everyone wants to return things after Christmas. It's not because that's the reasonable time to do it, but like it's the time everyone knows. We're just like, we mark a date and we go, this is the date. And everybody goes, okay, that's the date. And I think everyone's just going to do a bunch of stuff because that's how people do things. They're like, you walk by the bar, it's empty, you don't go in. If it's busy, you're like, I better try to get in there. And you'll wait outside for 4 hours to do it. I think just the idea that it might be busy gets people wanting to make it more busy.
One interesting last mechanic that I'll identify is if we look at how fees ramped up in May of last year and December of this past year, those are a little bit different in the kind of fee ramping up because you have an accumulation of fees bidding higher than the previous one. And when it happens so rapidly, you could have weird, almost like barbell scenarios in the block as far as fee distribution. We have a ton of long tail, extremely high fees. And then, a bunch which is like normal. And I don't know how this is very path and scenario dependent, but this is what we saw in the DGods block. And I think just imagine a bunch of DGods blocks back to back to back to back.
Mm-hmm. Yep, that makes sense. Like nothing, like you said about everyone going the same direction, Donny. Like nothing attracts a crowd like a crowd. So like degens beat on degens, degens, it just gets crazy. Yeah, makes sense. Okay, I actually got one more topic I want to quickly discuss. Let's do this in like the last 5 minutes, then we can close it out. The universal SAT symbol. I want to touch on this.
How did we forget about this one so far?
Yeah, hopefully don't run too long because there's a lot to talk about here. But Synonym, which is like the crazy BitKit, suggested a universal SAT symbol, which is basically the Bitcoin symbol, but they change the formatting to make it look different. And the basic idea here, I guess, like slight preamble for people to give some context, like SATs aren't real. It's kind of a social consensus thing, mainly because the protocol has 8 decimal places it can go to fractions to. And so if you do the numbers like 100,000, and then you get 2 decimal places for the million, and you round over and you get 1 Bitcoin. But if you parse it out, it looks like 100 million. So that's how we kind of get to SATs. So they're trying to move it to, it's just the B symbol, and when you're displaying SATs, you just have it as one number with like spaces in certain places to tell that you're talking about SATs and not Bitcoin as a full thing. I like it. I'll just say that. I'm a fan, but I'm curious your guys' take.
I'm all for new notation schemes and imagining how to repackage and recommunicate Bitcoin. This makes a lot of sense. I think it'd be only confusing for existing Bitcoiners, but the other 7 billion people out there need something which is very simple to understand. I haven't fought this battle, but I've always been the bits guy. A bit is 1/1,000,000th of a Bitcoin. You ask your dad or your mom, what do you call like the smallest unit of a Bitcoin? They will tell you it's probably a bit. Bit is 1/1,000,000, not 100 billion. And originally sats were called bit cents. A lot of the OGs in Bitcoin, like Adam Back, kind of like bits. So bit cent parity is my personal reference. But I'm all for trying to reimagine these. I think sats was a bit downstream of the Lightning push in Bitcoin because you want to, communicate the smallest unit you can in Lightning. And so that's why sats became the main shelling point for the past 3 or 4 years of Bitcoin culture. But really go back 5 years, very few people use sats. Everybody said denominations in Bitcoin.
Bob, Donny, thoughts?
Bob, you want to go?
Yeah, I don't know that I really have a preference. From a user experience perspective, it makes sense to show the shortest number possible. So for like an NFT marketplace or ordinals marketplace, you're going to want to show a small number, not a very large number. Large numbers are just generally hard to interpret. So what we've ended up doing on Bionic is if you have a large Bitcoin number, then we basically just round to the significant, maybe 3 or 4 significant figures. So, 0.001 BTC, that's pretty intuitive. But if you get to, the 1K sats range or the 10K sats range, then we just display it in sats. So, 1K sats, 9K sats, and we just show it as 9K sats. We don't even show an exact number until you actually get to other places. So this, we show Bitcoin at some places when you have a bigger value, because looking at, 93,462,222 sats, that's pretty unwieldy number. You don't need that kind of specificity. So we've gone with the double approach where large values are shown in BTC, small values are shown in sats. Kind of annoying, but feels okay from a user perspective.
Okay, poll. 10 years from now, do you think we'll be using sats or something not sats?
Sats, for sure.
Sats.
I have difficulty with this because we do need a notation for it. The $ currently is what we would use for sats because it's an S with the Bitcoin stuff on it, So, or rather, the Bitcoin B is a B with the dollar thing on it, or however you want to say it. Sats makes sense to me when Bitcoin is $100 million and we are using sats as a dollar, or when Bitcoin is $1 million and we're using sats as a penny, because it's sort of easy to notate that. But the short story that I'm trying to tell, rather the short version of the long story, is that people are just going to do what they're going to do. And I think everything sort of evolves as people come across friction. Something just takes charge. So it doesn't matter what we think or what the website thinks about advocacy for new symbols and new denominations of currency. People will just do as makes sense for them. TikTok is going to decide this, not us.
That's a good line. TikTok will decide.
That's a bar. That's a bar.
In the way that I view Bitcoin, it's not for daily transactions. It's not for coffee as we like to think it is. And it may be at some point when there's actual L2s or payment systems that actually run on. What's that?
When a coffee is a $1 trillion purchase, yeah.
Yeah, right. Or when it's a 0.0000000 whatever, and there's no friction because everything's on a roll up that actually works and does solve the trilemma or whatever. When that happens, then we can worry about how to denominate it. But in the meantime, Bitcoin, to me, is a long-term store of value. And I don't need to talk about how much a coffee costs if it's quadruple 01, because I'm not going to buy a coffee with Bitcoin, right?
Yeah, I guess I would say if TikTok's going to drive the culture and unit bias is a thing for newbies, then sats are definitely going to win. And you're seeing this with the ETFs where it's you can't afford a whole Bitcoin, but you can afford 1,000 shares of BitB or whatever it is. So if you can have 1,000 sats, that makes you feel a lot richer than 0.00 whatever.
Way more fun. It's way more fun.
So let's sats to the middle. It makes you
whatever Justin Sun denominates his chain in is what is going to happen, and There's nothing we can do about it. This
Is that still going on? Really?
Oh, that's another podcast.
Oh,
That's a
we'll do
great
that
name.
next week.
I love
do that
Joey
next week.
Nicole.
We're not even gonna like talk about what we're even talking about. But Justin Sun, the prodigal son of Tron, Bitcoin things. That's all we're gonna say.
His Excellency.
Yes. One thing though, I'm curious on your guys' perspective. So we're talking about Bitcoin fractions and sats. How do you guys feel about always having USD price close by so you know exactly how much Bitcoin you're giving up? I'm a big fan of that because I'm always like, how poor is this going to make me buying this quantum cat? If I don't know, I have to go BTC price token on Google, type in my fraction. Okay, I'll be that poor. Like,
I think it's really important right now.
I'd rather
Super
see it
important
all
now.
the time.
I was tasked with making an Ordinals 101 thing for a server, and one of the first things I did was, how much Bitcoin is this? And I said 1 Bitcoin equals this much ETH equals this much Sol. And because like nobody's really thinking in US dollars, they're thinking in other currencies that they normally operate in within these ecosystems. And I tried to give like 3 different examples of 1 Bitcoin is this, 0.05 Bitcoin is this, and 0.001 Bitcoin is this. Because when I first started messing around in Ordinals, I blew through like all the money I had in no time because it was like always 0.0 something. And I was like, it's not real. It's not money. So I don't know if USD is necessary, but having some sort of measurement system to like have an analog, how much Bitcoin this really is or how much money this really is, super important.
Depends on how much of a maxi you are. If you measure things in Bitcoin, then you don't need it because you live and breathe Bitcoin. If you are still living in the normal world, denominated in fiat currencies, then you need it. And so it just depends.
That's exactly why I asked, because if you're on the Bitcoin standard and you're reading, Safadine is your guy, then you're like, having dollars there is rotting your brain X%. So you need to rid yourself of that and just go full BTC. But I'm like, in the interim, I think it's totally needed.
But
like who cares?
It's gonna be USDC, USDT, or one of the new hot stables coming out.
Yep.
Yeah. So put a stable next to it. Keep it all.
Let's just do. I mean, I like sovereign stablecoins, DLLR dollar. Like that's got a nice ring to it. Let's get behind that. Go back to our Rootstock thesis.
One comment I recently heard from a Bitcoin maxi is if you're always trying to measure back to the dollar, like how are you are you certain that you're on the boat and you're comparing to the dollar on the sand? Or maybe you need to go think about yourself standing on the sand and Bitcoin is the appropriate denomination. And then there is no like good comparison. Fiat currencies are going to inflate to infinity. And so why are we comparing to something like that when Bitcoin is the currency that is on the sand? So anyway, that's
that's deep. It's all right. Anything else, guys? Or should we close it out? I think that was a great.
I could do this for 15 more minutes, so I think that's next time.
Yeah.
Always
Let's
good
call it.
conversation. I gotta hop.
Yeah.
So.
All right, guys. Till next time. Later.